Moonfall is without a shadow of a doubt the worst movie I have ever watched in a movie theater. Let's talk about why. A mysterious force knocks the moon from its orbit around the Earth and sends it hurtling on a collision course with life as we know it. With mere weeks before impact, the world is on the brink of annihilation. NASA executive and former astronaut Jo Fowler is convinced she has the key to save us all. But only one astronaut from her past, Brian Harper, and a conspiracy theorist, Casey Houseman, believe her. These unlikely heroes will mount an impossible last-ditch mission into space, leaving behind everyone they love, only to find that they might have prepared for the wrong mission. Now, Moonfall is a disaster movie, both in topic and in execution, which is ironic because just this week, Roland Emmerich had a go at Marvel and Star Wars. In a Scorsese style, these aren't real cinema. Although he was more saying that these movies are taking away from cinema by not giving money to up-and-coming people making original stories, which is kind of ironic considering the amount of money he's wasted on shit like Godzilla and Day After Tomorrow and so on and so forth. But Moonfall is a movie that caught my eye, looks kind of interesting. It's a sci-fi movie, it's something new, it's something different. Sure, it's not a Marvel movie, it's not a Star Wars movie, although they are sci-fi movies as well. Moonfall is a sci-fi movie, but it's also a fantasy movie because it's based on an event that's very unlikely to happen. Because if it did happen, you know, hats off to Roland Emmerich for predicting it, but it's just so crazy, the whole thing. At the same time, a lot of people look at it and go, yeah, but that's the whole point of it. It's crazy, it's a disaster movie, it's a lot of fun. But they make these movies on the Sci-Fi Channel for lower budgets and get the same effect. As I mentioned, it's a disaster movie. We know what we're going to get with this. We've seen Roland Emmerich movies before, 2012, Day After Tomorrow. Generally, they're shit. Movies that aren't going to happen, they're not based in reality, they're based in this fantasy world he's made up, thinking of the most extreme possibilities of what could happen. A lot of the story is nonsensical, and I'm sure if you spoke to scientists or specialists on the subject, of which I am not, they'd say, okay, this guy's crazy, these stories are nonsensical. Now, as I mentioned, I'm not a scientist, so maybe they'll say, hey, yeah, this stuff could happen, it's just unlikely. Although the moon being taken over by a sentient robot created by humans on a distant world millennia ago in order to help humans initially and then sets out to take over humans because it felt it was enslaved by humans. This movie is kind of ridiculous in so many elements, but the main thing to look at with Roland Emmerich in particular is that this movie basically mashes together Independence Day, 2012, Day After Tomorrow, and a little bit of iRobot, even though he didn't make that one. But it's kind of a mash of all those. And what you get is a story that's, as I mentioned, ridiculous. It's stupid. It's just bad in so many elements. Now, they've got a lot of sci-fi. They've got some great visuals. They've got some bad visuals. Some of the CGI at times is very, very bad. But some of it's pretty good and some of it's pretty unique visual-wise. Although at the same time, why the Chrysler Building in New York always gets torn apart in these movies, I don't know. So I'm going to forgive the story on this one because I wasn't expecting a great story from it anyway. You know what to expect with these disaster movies. They're always generally a load of bollocks. I don't think there's ever been a really good disaster movie. There's none that spring to mind immediately. If there is, let me know in the comment section below. You could maybe stretch it and say maybe Jurassic Park could be considered a disaster movie because, you know, if dinosaurs came back and started eating everybody, that'd be kind of a disaster. But in terms of these disaster, end of the world movies, there's not many of them that are fantastic, if any. Now, a lot of that's down to Roland Emmerich making really bad movies, but that's another story for another day. Focusing on Moonfall, looking at the cast, I wasn't blown away. You know, Halle Berry is in it, fantastic actress. Aside from that, you've got one of the guys from Game of Thrones who I wouldn't consider a mainstream actor, but he was decent in it. He wasn't great. He was kind of similar to his role in Game of Thrones, and I think he's going to be typecast as that kind of wacky guy, kind of Nick Frost level role. And then you got Patrick Wilson. Patrick Wilson, of course, being the guy you get when you can't really get anyone else in your movie because people go, hey, I know him from something. Isn't he the guy from that thing that I watched? He kind of a little bit looks like Will Arnett, so, you know, it makes you look to that. But yeah, Patrick Wilson, not really a household name for many people, I would say. A lot of people would recognize the face, not necessarily the name. So as I mentioned, the story's nonsensical. Some of the visuals are good, some of the visuals are bad, but the movie has nothing about it. There's nothing that makes you care in this movie. It's the end of the world and it's so blasé all the way through. You don't really have time to connect with any of the characters, to the point where when the main characters are in danger at the end of the movie, No one gives a shit. Furthermore, there's a B story with other side characters and they're trying to get from point A to point B and no one really gives a shit. Like, if you don't care about the main characters, you certainly don't care about the B characters. And the characters are so bad in the movie. The dialogue is terrible in the movie. Some of the line delivery in the movie is horrendous. Even from some good actors like Michael Pena. He was given some terrible dialogue and not a lot to work with. And it's a strange role to see him in because he can do a lot better. Hopefully it was a good payday for him because the budget for this movie was $140 million or so, I'm told. Which is a lot of money. In fact, it's one of the biggest budget movies not backed by one of the major studios or major streamers in the last decade, which is why it should be better than it is. And it's actually absolutely terrible. Funny thing, I went to go see this movie in the cinema. First time back in the cinema since the global pandemic started. And when I went to see it, it was the first screening in my area of Moonfall. With all the promotion behind it, there's been a lot of TV ads here, a lot of YouTube ads everywhere for this movie. You would think people would flock to go see this movie. However, I went to the very first screening of it in my local cinema. Nobody else turned up. The cinema was empty. Here's a picture to prove it. So I had the small theater in my local cinema all to myself throughout this movie, and I so badly wanted to leave in the middle of this movie. I was so bored. And for a disaster movie, that's never good. The pacing is ridiculous at the start. It happens so fast. Similar to what I said about Jupiter Ascending recently. If you haven't watched that video, it's right up here. The pacing is so crazy at the start. There's so much happening. It's hard to wrap your head around everything that's happening. And before you know it, the moon is falling. Who would have guessed that in a movie called Moonfall? Now, these disaster movies, they're never going to be anything spectacular, as I mentioned. They're supposed to be fun. They're supposed to have some crazy element that makes you go, wow, in it. This movie has no memorable moments in it, has no redeeming qualities to it, and as I mentioned at the very beginning, is one of the worst cinema experiences I've ever had. My own local cinema didn't even bother putting it in IMAX. They kept Spider-Man in IMAX. They put Sing 2 in IMAX, which was packed, by the way. The screening for that one had people coming out the door, but my cinema was empty for Moonfall. Cinema didn't even care about this movie. Didn't even put it in one of their fancier screens. It was in one of their most basic screens. The story was nonsensical, but I expected that. The visuals were good at times and bad at times. The acting was bad. The dialogue was bad. There was no redeeming qualities in it, no memorable moments in it. And then I circle back to the whole thing about Roland Emmerich giving out about MCU and Star Wars. And sure, we're all sick of MCU at the moment. It needs something fresh, although Spider-Man was absolutely fantastic and hopefully is the start of something special in the MCU. Although I thought Eternals was going to be good and that was absolutely terrible, but less about the MCU. Star Wars, of course, it's had its ups and downs down the years. Last Jedi, one of the worst pieces of shit you'll ever watch. But Mandalorian is getting better and better and better. And Book of Boba Fett, we're going to talk about that one soon, but I'm really enjoying that one right now. But these movies, they have their fan bases. Whether you love them or hate them, they have their fan bases. They give something to these people. People will say, yeah, but Roland Emmerich movies have fan bases. Yeah, but that fan base is like 30 people and they're all related to Roland Emmerich. Because this guy makes some of the worst movies I've ever seen. This guy's been responsible for 2012, 10,000 BC, Independence Day Resurgence, and now Moonfall. And they're all some of the worst movies you will ever watch. And this guy has the gall to come out and insult other people's work. That's fucking insane. Because Moonfall is possibly the worst movie I'm gonna watch in the next 10 years. So it's quite clear I am not at all a fan of Moonfall, and I would love to hear your opinions of the movie in the comment section below. Jump down there and talk with me about it. I'll respond to every comment that I can, unless you're talking absolute bollocks, of course, because that happens sometimes. But now we jump into the rating for Moonfall, and I don't think anyone will be surprised that I'm going to give it the lowest of the low. It gets a 1 out of 10. Absolutely terrible piece of shit.